The Father Factory is a coaching service for dads that addresses the intergenerational impact of their trauma from childhood sexual violence. Voice lessons will help to bridge the traumatic past with its current developed spiritual, medical, physical, and behavioral conditions that are the result of CSV. Join us to help dads be intentional parents.
My guest today is the co-executive director of Connect. He is one of the U.S. leaders selected by the Nova Foundation to participate in a groundbreaking move to end violence initiative. He is our champion for justice, Quentin Walcott. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna use all of my back in the day words. I'm hyped. This is gonna be dope. This is so cool right now. I am sitting with one of my brothers from back in the day who has been doing some tremendous work around domestic violence. And I'm so proud and happy to introduce to you Mr. Q, but his full name is Quentin Walcott. So Walcott, Mr. Q, what's going on, brother? How you doing?
Yeah, Hassan, man, I really appreciate you inviting me on and having this conversation with you, because that's how we teach and how we learn from each other through really conversations more than, chalkboard and, PowerPoints, really. So we just have conversations, real life conversations, and I'm really glad to be part of this, and I'm proud of the work you're doing. So thank you, brother.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And you and the fam at Connect, and we'll jump right into it. So Q, tell us a little bit about your work with Connect, your work with the Father Pledge, the Men's Roundtable, and particularly your work in DV.
Right. So Connect is a New York City-based organization, and we do work in the 5 boroughs of New York City. And I do, many of us do work nationally, and I do a lot of work international as well. So, thinking that doing work around domestic violence, intimate partner violence, and working with men would bring me all over the world, and it has. So, I walked into the work not even realizing that. But the one thing about Connect is that makes us unique is that, one, we think about domestic violence and gender violence prevention work, right? So that's not a lot of organizations did that when we first started about 17 years ago. So we were like one of the first to kind of go from that angle. Most domestic violence organizations are about, intervention, providing, shelter, providing counseling, and helping survivors kind of victims and survivors move through their experiences around intimate partner violence. So, and we've always done that, and we support that work. And as you know, we have how we kind of approach our work is working with community partners, which you have been one, and your previous organization has been one, and then also training people. So we have the Connect Training Institute. People come through there, and at our healthiest, we train maybe 700 people a year to either work with survivors, children who witness violence, and even mostly men that are committing violence in the relationships. So that's kind of been not like our crutch has always been, or no, really more of our umbrella has been the training and then helping communities all throughout New York City develop strategies in dealing with domestic violence in their work, in their organizations, in their communities. And then, whatever populations they happen to work in, we help them develop that and provide technical assistance and capacity building. And the other thing that really made us unique was that, looking at domestic violence and me coming into the work, 20 some odd years ago now, looking at the work and saying, we're really not addressing the issue. We're putting Band-Aids on it by just only working with people after the violence, right? So we're just kind of like, helping people kind of put a Band-Aid on, hopefully heal, and go about their day and hope that they don't get into another domestic violence relationship or they don't experience it again. But I think one of the things that I helped kind of bring to the conversation was, how can we really address the issue at the root cause level and with those who are doing the harm? So that meant at that point, engaging men and boys in the conversations about domestic violence, because we were committing most of the harm. And, a lot of things support us committing this harm and not being held accountable, So a lot of it for me was like, how do we kind of go a step back before there's a victim survivor and say, well, somebody's doing the violence, and then something about how we're living and how we're raised and how society is supporting the idea that, predominantly men, when, the cases and the statistics we were working from, where men were abusing women and children, up to, 90% of the times of the cases that were reported. So for me, it was like, how can we work with these men to interrupt cycles of violence, and then also look at why they making the decision to be abusive in their relationships. So that meant we needed to kind of look at men, what's going on with us being socialized a particular type of way, what is supporting our choices and treating women and children and other men certain types of ways. So that was kind of like, that's what makes Connect unique. And we have an analysis, we have analysis of systems and how they show up for Black and brown folks and for women and for young people in different ways than they do for our white counterparts. Yeah. So we have a lot of analysis, and we kind of work on the intersection of race and gender in all of our work.
Beautiful, beautiful. And you've done work with the Father Pledge.
So the Father's Day Pledge is something that...
Yeah, no, I've been a part of that, been able to go with you guys to City Hall and kind of repeat the pledge and bring a number of men along with me as well.
Right. Thank you, and I appreciate and that's... Yeah. And the Father's Day Pledge is something that we co-created with Councilwoman Jalissa Ferreras really about 12 years ago now. Wow. This, 2021 will be our 12th year of doing it. And it's something that we started on New York City Council steps, and it's grown to 55 cities throughout the country, and also it's done in Canada, and which we're working on getting it done in Brazil right now too. So it's become a global initiative. But the Father's Day Pledge is really about men, fathers, father figures, mentors, people who are impacting communities and impacting the lives of people to step up and take a pledge to really address the issue of domestic violence and intimate partner violence. And what we've done, and it's grown over the years, so it's not just about domestic violence, it's about gun violence, it's about other forms of community violence where men can play a role in reaching out to other men and looking at, standing with and standing for our sisters and our daughters and, our young people, stand with them, take leadership from them, but we working together to really kind of end violence in our communities and make them more about the cultures of peace rather than the culture of violence. So that's something that we've been doing for a long time. And a quick plug, because of COVID this year, we weren't able to kind of do it on the steps, and many of the cities throughout the country have not been able to do it. So we have an online pledge that we're kind of having people do all year long, and that's fathersdaypledge.org. So I encourage all of you to go on, sign on, men, women, and child, sign on to the pledge. And I hope, if all things go well, God willing, that we're able to kind of bring all the cities together in Washington, D.C. Mall next year and, really come together and really have a strong stand, a strong voice in Washington, D.C. Yeah. COVID permitting and, God permitting.
Yeah, kudos on that, because it's definitely a blessing for all of those that participate in that, and you need what I call circle of supports. Right. And it definitely serves as that. As you were talking and I'm hearing, the work around domestic violence, and I'm always curious or want to make sure that the people know and are familiar with the statistics. Like, what are the statistics that people need to know about domestic violence so that it's real for us and that we are, kind of walking this walk with it?
Right. No, and before I do that real quick, Hassan, I just want to kind of talk about the words that we're using to describe essentially domestic violence. But sometimes we use domestic violence, DV. Sometimes we use intimate partner violence. It's also known as IPV sometimes. And sometimes we'll talk about interpersonal violence, right? And that's kind of more of an umbrella term for all those other types of violence. And sometimes we'll use gender-based violence, which is kind of like the ultimate umbrella term to describe violence amongst genders and the power dynamics involved in that. Domestic violence is essentially about power and control in your relationship. Somebody has it, somebody's trying to gain it or maintain it in their relationship, and so the strategy is like gaining and maintaining power and control in your relationship. And then the tactics used are the different types of abuse, and we'll get into that a little bit later, but like the forms of abuse, psychological, emotional, mental, those are used to gain and maintain power and control. And for right now, like the national statistics, and this is Domestic Violence Awareness Month in October now. So you'll hear a lot about stats this month and situations, but domestic violence is something that happens every few seconds, right? So you can do the math about that, and it's probably like right now it's like 1 in 4 women experience domestic violence, so that's 25%. If you have 4 women in your family, 4 friends in your workplace, 4 people is likely one of them are experiencing domestic violence. And in terms of men can be abused as well, right? It takes shapes in many different forms. It looks very different. But remember, just going back to the essence of what domestic violence is about power and control in a relationship. So it doesn't matter your gender, your size, what you look like, how tall you are, how short you are, right? It's about power and control and getting to that point, either by being physical, emotional, psychological, whatever way. It's about power and control. So don't get caught up into the gender so much or the size of someone. But 1 in 7 men right now are victims of domestic violence, right? And about 1 in 15 young people experience domestic violence, from like teen dating violence to relationship violence. And what teen dating violence is, looks very much like adult domestic violence, because young people learn this behavior from adults in their lives. So
like stalking and stuff like that.
Stalking, you got stalking, you got trafficking is a big part of domestic violence under that umbrella as well. But you got psychological abuse, mental abuse, emotional abuse, which is kind of like playing with your mind and playing with your emotions, playing with your feelings, making you feel like, you're almost going crazy. Or, most domestic violence actually is non-physical, right? The least used form of violence is physical, but it seems so more powerful or dangerous because you see a black eye, you see a bruise. But most domestic violence is probably emotional, psychological, and it's financial abuse as well. You messing with someone's ability to live or make money, or taking or controlling their money. So there's various types of abuses that make up domestic violence or intimate partner violence.
Wow. Yeah, that strikes, right? Because that power and control piece is a lot of what the work you guys do, right? To kind of balance that out, right? So if, you being socialized in a way that tells you power means that you're good enough or you're valued, and your control over people is what makes you, worthy, then you live out this. And you said something earlier, like, which is an interesting perspective to look at it, because people often see a perpetrator and they immediately want to just kind of go for the jugular, right? They just want to kind of erase this individual. And you guys are also doing the work to hold them accountable and to understand how they got to that place as well. And, and if we're talking specifically about domestic violence, we're saying like they have learned somewhere that power and control of other individuals matters, and that's important. And so, that really kind of rings a bell for me, and really hits it off. And I think about like, the percentage of men, like what is the data saying about why the percentage of those that perpetrate against women and children are men? Like why is that? Yeah.
I think a lot, like what you just kind of touched on, was that it's like how we're socialized to be men and women, and what power and control looks like, and how does that manifest inside of our relationship. So a lot of it is we're socialized to be, the leader, the head of the household, the breadwinner, by any means necessary, right? So a lot of it is just really a traditional way of looking at relationships. And I think this transcends, many different cultures and religion and locations
Yeah.
around the world, that men are in charge. Men are the presidents. Men are the heads of the corporations. Just this sense of power, and it's kind of connected to our masculinity, to our manhood, and how we're socialized to be. So a lot of it is when you treat men and women differently. Sometimes we know it and we don't know exactly the impact or even why we're doing that. Like if we treat sports differently, like right now, the NBA is playing the finals, but few people know that the WNBA is playing the finals as well. They're in another bubble somewhere. So there's just not, women and girls, and particularly Black women and girls and women of color, are taken less seriously than men are. So it's like a lot of it is ingrained in that. And of the statistics that we know, and because of how society is kind of built around, hyper toxic forms of masculinity, if you're being abused in your relationship and you're a man, you're less likely, because of how and this is our own thing, that we set up ourselves in society to look like we're always in control, we can't be hurt, that, we won't talk about, my girlfriend, 105 pounds, I'm 200 something pounds, she's abusing me, right? She may even be abusing me physically or emotionally. But so a lot of times, because of how we set ourselves up as men in society, men will not report that they're being abused.
Yeah.
So of the cases that we do know, it's approximately 85 to 90% where men and boys are abusing women and girls. And it's, and I say that to say, not to kind of qualify or justify abuse in any way, but that experience of men, because of our manhood, because of our masculinity, blocking us from being our true selves and expressing that we're hurt, right? Or the psychological and mental trauma that we may experience from childhood or even in relationships, because we're socialized a particular type of way, we don't express those forms of emotions, right? So, and for survivors that are women, they're mostly not believed. So they're likely not to report either. So the fact that we have this statistic of 90% of the cases or 85% of the cases where men are abusing women is likely much, 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 much more, right? In New York City, the average calls for domestic violence to the police department are about 700 calls a day. So that's probably about 25% of the actual cases that are going on. So if you do the math and sift through those statistics, it's it's a real issue that women are probably experiencing much more than men, but men do experience it as well.
Wow.
From heterosexual relationships and from same-sex relationships as well.
Wow. And it's so much stuff. I'm just thinking about how probably the average person that's probably first just hearing this information, getting privy to what you're saying, and just trying to make it real for them, right? How people say stuff like, well, why doesn't she just leave? Right. Like even the way that you mentioned control and power versus like he's bigger, he's stronger than a woman, yet she's abusing him. I think that very thing is a toxic view of power and control, because we only see it in the sense of it being a physical thing. When it expands beyond that, and so why does she stay? Why does she just get up and leave? Or if he really loves me, then he'll hit me. And can you speak to those things that sometimes commonly are said? And I got like a follow up to that as well. But right along the lines of that is this whole piece around how do I intervene, or do I intervene? Right? I hear my next door neighbors going at it, and I'm like, oh, that's just what they do. She shouldn't have did that, and he wouldn't have did this, right? He wouldn't have responded that way, or that's their business. You kind of jump on all of that for me.
Yeah, man. That's yeah. So I would say going back to the whole question of why does she stay?
Yeah.
That's probably the first question everyone asks themselves, right? Even when you do trainings at different organizations, everyone kind of starts off with that first question. But at Connect, we like to look at why is it happening before we ask the question, why does she stay? Right.
Yes.
So if you can answer why is it happening,
Yeah.
you almost answer why is she staying.
Yeah.
And then we also like to change language because like the language we use sometimes unknowingly can be blaming, right? So if you start off with a survivor of domestic violence, victim survivor of domestic violence in front of you, you asking that person, why are you staying in this situation? You're putting it on them
Yeah.
that they're
Yeah.
receiving
Yeah.
it's their fault
Yeah.
that they're in a relationship and they're staying in it, and why there's something that you're doing that that makes you get hit. So first of all, just in terms of that question, we like to say, what are the obstacles to leaving?
Wow.
And then before we even go there, we like to say, if it's a man doing the abuse, why does he batter and abuse?
Yeah.
Right? To kind of dig into that, what are the causes and what are the decisions around the choices around being abusive or not?
Yeah.
So if you dig into that question, I don't know if you remember our training we've done for your staff.
Yeah.
We asked that question first, why does a person abuse? And you could fill up a whole board
Yeah.
or a chart paper with like different reasons and rationale.
Yeah.
But ultimately, we believe most of the cases that it's a choice to be abusive in your relationship. Because in terms of men, most men are not. There's other ways of dealing with conflict that we need to just spend some time and jumping into that. A lot of it has to do around, again, how it's socialized to be men, to be in control, and keeping that control and that power in our relationship. So there's many different reasons around, people talk about, religion, they talk about Islam, they talk about different forms of religion that explain why people are abusive, and it's not the reason. Alcohol, substance abuse is not the reason. It may exacerbate it, make it worse, but that's not why people abuse. Stress from not having a job, a livable wage, worried about where we're going to live. And also from this idea of living up to who we are to be as men, who we're supposed to be as men, right? That's hard when you think about all the things that can come out of that. So sometimes we can't even handle that, and we're abusive towards, the people in our lives and our partners, and then, and how people interpret, religious texts to say that gives me license to do that. When I used to run batters programs and talk to the guys who were in the group for abusing their wives and partners, I would say, what brings you here and why do you feel justified in doing that? Some brothers would break out a Bible and read a passage.
Wow.
And I'll say, well, read the passage before that and read the passage behind that. And it nullifies that. Or Quran or whatever book of faith they would use to justify their behavior, all right?
Yeah.
Or the images and things that they've seen in their in their families and TV, whatever. But but to go into what are the obstacles to leaving, it's fear of dying if I leave, fear that the system is not going to respond the right way, is going to leave me out there, or I love the person, I just want the abuse to stop. I can change the person. Like you said, this idea of we teach boys and girls that, a little boy hits you, that means he likes you. Yeah. So the whole idea of love hurts. Yeah. And that's a real thing for adults as well. He hits me and he tells me that because he loves me and he wants to make sure I'm okay. Right? So same things we tell our kids, I'm doing this because I want you to learn your lesson, blah, 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 blah. It hurts me more than it hurts you. All the different things and reasons why we come up with. So it's really about breaking down for that one individual, because it's not a one size fits all around why people, what are the obstacles of leaving a relationship. It's different from person to person, as is the reason why people who are abusive in a relationship are abusive, right? And, and it sounds real corny, been saying it for years, the idea that hurt people, that is so true. One of the reasons why it happens, but we got to dig into what is going on with our brothers, about how we're raised, what's going on in society. And it's not just this whole idea of poverty creates violence, our thing is that domestic violence creates poverty as well, right? So if you have to leave your home or get arrested or whatever it may be, that creates poverty as well. So there's many different reasons around that. Yeah. But if we shift our language, we can get to a better result.